Good morning. I think we can get started. It is Wednesday, and so I'm hoping people will trickle in. For those who are here, thank you for coming. This talk is about the programmable web and how Atlas fits into that entire new concept that's growing and developing as we speak. My name is Nikhil Kothari. I'm a software architect in the UI framework team at Microsoft. Most people probably have never heard of this team called UI Framework, better known as ASP.NET. It's ASP.NET, Windows Forms, all of those technologies together in one team. For the last few months, we've been working on Atlas, and we've just put out a new build of Atlas that was announced on Monday. And I'm going to be showing a bunch of features from that enable you to write applications that tap into this concept called programmable web. So with that, a very high-level view of the agenda that I'm going to be covering today. We're going to be covering this concept, programmable web, and I'll talk more about what I mean by that. But we'll look at both writing applications that consume services, applications often called mashups, as well as writing services that help you sort of participate in this by enabling the programmable web for other applications to make use of. I'll be showing a demo application to illustrate the concepts called MIX06. It's a little music library kind of application, and it's implemented using ASP.NET Atlas. So you've probably heard Web 2.0 more than you want at this conference. I'm going to say it one more time and just one more time. Basically, it's sort of a buzzword that has come to mean everything that's new in the web. Everything new that's being done across the board comes under this one umbrella. I've taken a random sampling of various concepts that came to my mind and just sort of put them in that tag cloud format, kind of going with the whole team of a lot of websites out there. And the thing to highlight there is programmable web is a centerpiece of this entire sort of set of concepts. It facilitates a number of these other technologies and ideas by its core aspects, and I'll show that as we go along. So with that, let's look at specifically what I mean by this concept. Essentially, what's happening is the web is transforming from a content document publishing medium into more of a software platform. What do I mean by that? In the existing web, or the Web 1.0, so to speak, the web was all about delivering content to consumers, and content was linked via hyperlinks. That was the sort of communication between different pieces of content. What's happening now is that you have applications and sites turning into components in this new platform of interconnected network of computers, basically. And the idea is that these applications are sharing data between each other by virtue of services and APIs, as well as common data formats. That's what this programmable web is all about. APIs, services, common data formats, and enabling the user to get a much better experience of the web. There are a number of applications and scenarios. The first and foremost is mashups. And we'll be talking about that in the first half. And then there are other aspects to it as well that I'll cover. So mashups. Basically, a mashup is an application that integrates one or more services or data from one or more applications or sites to create an integrated experience for the end user. That's more than the sum of the parts, so to speak. What do they do? Fundamentally, they take data and correlate to each other. So you have different applications talking about similar things that can be brought together and linked together for the end user to experience in one sort of cohesive single spot. Why would you care about these mashups? First and foremost, there are mechanisms to leverage these new concepts that are sort of emerging on the web to create richer and more immersive experience for your users. And frankly speaking, users are going to come to actually expect this level of sophistication from applications if they're not already doing so. This is sort of going to set the new bar for what an application is, and allows you to differentiate yourself from other sort of similar applications. So before we go further, what I'm going to do is actually demo an existing application I have. It's a very basic application. Doesn't actually do any Web 2.0 stuff, so to speak, yet. This is the application we'll be using in the later demos. So let me switch over to my demo machine. So here's this application I have. It's written using Atlas and ASP.NET. It's basically a very simple music library, music collection kind of application. The general idea is, this application offers a set of albums. Users can come into the system, log in, select some albums into their library, rate those albums, and this application then aggregates that data and creates a top-rated albums list. That's what this application does. So I can go ahead, for example, log in. I'll log in as myself. And I have 3 albums in my collection. I can do the standard things like, search for new albums, and you can see the standard things with ASP.NET Atlas that you can do, like autocomplete. I'll go ahead and choose one of the artists. Search, you'll see the results sort of get shown on the page without full refreshes. I can go ahead and add, and you'll see that happens without refreshes as well. Go ahead, remove, or change the rating. Those types of things I can do without any sort of flicker, with a very smooth experience. So this is what Atlas enables you to do. And there have been a couple of talks in the past couple of days where you'd have seen more of this in terms of how you would go about using Atlas to enable these experiences. So the other part of this application is I can drill into a details view. And you'll see this details view is actually very basic right now. All it offers is some cover art and a track listing. That's pretty much all it offers. And so this is the very basic application that we have to start with. So let's switch back. I have a couple of concept slides before we get back into the demo. So the goal for this exercise here is we want to create a more enhanced and engaging user experience. We want to create something compelling as a value add that this site offers beyond just a list management of albums, for example. So one way to think about it is a user, when they think about music, they think about various sites that offer them music-related information. How do you tap into all that information and give them that experience in one spot? For example, we have iTunes, which manages a list of top-selling albums based on its market data, based on its users' buying patterns. And we want to leverage that data. iTunes offers a RSS feed, which I can consume here and actually show the top-selling albums right in my own application. So that's one sort of thing that we're going to do. On the details page, it's fairly bare bones right now. I can go ahead and bring in search results that the user might otherwise do for a particular artist and show them right in my application using the SOAP services that are offered by MSN Search. Secondly, I can go ahead and leverage into all of Amazon's market data and bring in similar albums. So if you like this particular album, you might like these albums based on other users' buying patterns. And they offer a REST service, and I'll go ahead and consume that to offer that in my application. So that's what we're going to do. This just one geeky slide kind of to explain the overall flow of the application, what's happening behind the scenes. I have my application. It has a client piece and a server piece. And then there's the third-party service, whether it's iTunes or MSN or Amazon. Basically what I have going on is there's client logic in the application running that initiates a request saying, I need to go get some data for this particular artist, for example. It goes off and creates a request to the server to a piece of server-side code that's going to be a proxy to the actual third-party service. And what this server-side logic does is a number of things. First and foremost, it might do something simple as looking up cache to see if, whether you actually need to make that request to the third-party service. Keep in mind, you want to avoid those network connections if you can. Assuming that it's not in the cache, this component will go ahead and create the service request to call the service. And in order to do so, what it's going to do is take incoming data from the client as well as configuration from the server. For example, I have my Amazon associate ID, Amazon subscription ID that's on my server in my configuration. I'm going to combine that to create the service request I'm going to send out to Amazon. I'll go ahead and invoke the service now, and the service will come back with some response based on its sort of data schema. And I'm going to take that data, process it. For example, I might transform to trim it down to what I specifically need, or I might do some further aggregation on the server, or I might as well as do caching. And once I'm done with creating a response for my client, I'm going to send it out where the client is then going to consume it and show that in the page in some sort of visual manner, or do something with it behind the scenes. So that's the general sort of flow of data and flow of sort of execution in a mashup. And this pattern can be sort of applied to a number of different scenarios. So let's look at the next step, which is we're going to apply these concepts to this actual application. So before I start changing this application itself, I'm going to run through a sequence of steps to kind of illustrate the concepts. Keep in mind the animation that you just saw for the canonical mashup, and I'm going to kind of show concepts related to that sequence. What I have is a project in Visual Studio a web project, and I'm going to go ahead and open this in Firefox. And basically, these are very simple pages that kind of show what's going on. What I have in the first page is some client-side logic that's going to go talk to server-side logic to fetch some data when I click the Show Albums button. And basically, it brought some data back. The more interesting thing is what's going on behind the scenes here. So in step1.aspx, what I have is some JavaScript code that calls into a web service, and I'm calling into this web service via a proxy, a script proxy that was generated by Atlas, simply by me creating a service reference to the service topsellingservice.asmx. Once I get some data back, my completed callback is called, and I'm using that data, the result, to iterate over the results and creating DOM elements and inserting them into the DOM, sort of programmatically and imperatively. So this service is something that I wrote myself, which is what you would do today. Essentially, it's a web service, and Atlas provides a way to interact with your web services from the client using script. And you'd have seen a lot more of that in Shanku's talk on Monday. So I have a method called getTopAlbums. It's marked as web method, which makes it public. What I'm essentially doing here is implementing that canonical bridge that I described in the slide a few moments ago. I'm going to look up into my cache to see if the data is already on my server. If it is, I'm going to go ahead and return it. If it's not, I'm going to create a web request with this RSS URL. I'm calling the iTunes service here in this particular example. Here's the RSS URL. As you can see, it's a long URL, but basically invoking this URL returns some RSS data. I'm taking that RSS data, my response, and running through it with XPath to fish out the specific items and then the album artist information from that. And what I'm doing in addition to just getting data from iTunes is also doing a next step, which is to filter the set of data to the set of albums I have in my particular application, because I don't want to show albums that aren't in my library. So what I'm going to do here is enumerate over my data to see if that album's in my collection, and if it is, add it to the albums list. And the last thing I'm going to do is go ahead and insert that into the cache at this point, so that any subsequent requests are not going to be served out of cache, and then return this list. So you can see what I've done here is manually implemented the server-side piece. So Atlas enables you to implement this logic in a declarative manner. What I'm going to show you is a new file called topsellingbridge.asbx. ASBX stands for the bridge file. And what I'm doing is declaring a bridge, saying that it's going to be using a REST proxy. RSS is basically a REST protocol. Here's the service URL, same URL. I'm going to enable caching very simply by just turning it on, saying just use the bridge cache. It's a built-in component. I'm going to define a method called getTopAlbums, and then declaratively define the same sort of XPath operations to fish out the interesting pieces of information. And then last thing I'm going to do is add a custom transformer, which is now going to do my filtering. So this particular transform here builds up a set of objects that correspond to artist and album information from that feed. And now I'm going to take that list and create albums that are filtered to my collection. So you can see what the bridge allows you to do is declaratively specify the caching, the transforms you can do on the data, and it goes ahead and behind the scenes creates that service request and invokes the service. I can go ahead and use that in the same way that I was doing so before. Basically, the bridge is exposed as a web service in very much the same way as if I had written an ASMX myself. So it's basically the same code here. The next step I want to show is actually looking at this. The code that I was writing to actually show the albums was imperative. What I want to do really is use this notion of templating, where the page designer can actually define a template for what my table looks like. This is my template. And then I want to go ahead and use this template rather than sort of imperatively building up my cells and rows. And so I can do that with Atlas. I can create a list view component, define a template on it, and then identify the different pieces of the template that are data bound, like title cell and artist cell, and bind their text property to different pieces of the data. And then I can do the same thing that I was doing before, call the bridge, get the albums, and then set the data property on the list view. And now what the list view does is iterate over the data and build up the set of rows. Again, the end result's the same. So the next thing I want to show you is taking it even further. Now, if you look at step 3, I have this kind of code going on in my page. Let's say I wanted to do this across multiple pages. I want to somehow encapsulate that. And I'm going to show you how Atlas enables you to do that. So I have a JS file, top selling albums. And I'm going to create a class, a script class, using some Atlas OOP patterns. And then I'll show how you can use that. So basically, here's a class called top selling albums. It has an albums property, which the list view is going to go bind to. It has a load method, which is going to be called whenever my button is clicked. And in that load method, I'm calling the same bridge in the same way. Get top albums on the top selling bridge, passing in a function that should be called when the results are available, because all of this is happening asynchronously. When the results come in, I'm going to take this albums, set the albums property, and raise a change notification. That's going to trigger the data binding to happen on the client. So let's look at how this sample works. If it works, you should actually not see any difference. So when I click this, you'll see basically I get the same list. Let me show you how I used it. So here's the same template, the same HTML markup, and the same definition of the template. But what you can see now here is I have this component, MIX:top selling albums. That's my custom component. It's given an ID albums data source. And now my list view is actually bound to that, where it's the list view's data property is set to the albums data source and the albums property off of that. So this is the equivalent of me doing list view.set data, the return data. It's the same thing. But what I can now do is I have this logic all packaged into this tag, which I can then put into multiple pages without copying script around. So that's sort of the benefit of encapsulating the logic into components, just reusability. So with this basic concepts, now I'm actually going to switch over and start showing you how I can apply bridges and script components in my actual application. So let me close some files. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the album details page and start using MSN search and Amazon's similar similarity lookup to find out similar albums. I'm doing the same thing here as you saw before. I'm going to go ahead and include references to my ASBXs. So let's look at the similar albums ASBX. So you can see here what I have is a proxy. I'm again using the REST protocol. I've specified caching, so I don't keep hitting Amazon every time I make a request for the same album. And I've defined a method called getSimilarAlbums, and it takes a bunch of parameters. These are the parameters that Amazon defines on its particular operation. It takes the service, the name of the operation, which is similarity lookup, and it takes some things like your key ID, associate tag. These are things that would be in your configuration on the server. And you can also define what you want from Amazon in terms of all the data it offers. And here's another parameter that's going to come in from the client. All of these other parameters are marked as server only because it doesn't make sense to come from the client. I'm going to go ahead and actually transform the data, and this time I'm using a new transform called the XPath bridge transformer. What this takes the XML data coming back from Amazon and converts that into a set of objects by performing XPath queries. So I'm going to say for all items in the response, go ahead and select the artist and the title and create these objects. And then I'm going to pass that in through the same transformer that's going to go ahead and create album objects. And this transformer is in my code here. So it basically implements iBridge transformer, one of the extensibility points we have in ASBXs. And it implements code very similar to what you first saw in my ASMX. It takes this list of objects that was produced out of the XPath transformer, finds whether they are in my collection of albums, and if they are, build up an album row with all the properties that are on the album, and go ahead and add that to the list, and then return that list out of here. So this bridge basically defines how I'm going to interact with Amazon. The client is going to pass the item ID. I'm going to combine these different parameters from the server, create the service and invoke the service, take the data, trim it down to what I specifically need. On the client page, what I'm going to do is start defining templates. So here's my similar albums. And here's my look and feel for each item. So it's basically, I have a div, which is my list container, and each album is going to be a div, which has an image for the thumbnail and labels for the title and artist, as well as an add button. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and define the behavior of this page. So all of the behavior is separate from the UI. I'm going to, oops, this is the wrong one. It's this one. So I have a component, similar albums, which I'll show in a moment. It's the data source for this list view. So you can see this list view is bound to the similar albums data source. The albums property off of that, very similar to what we just saw. And the list view then defines the bindings for the thumbnail. For example, the thumbnail is bound to the ID with a two-string formatting, so I can build up a URL with the ID. The title, the album title label is bound to the title property. The album artist property label is bound to the artist property, and so on. So with just this change, let's actually look at this running. So I'll go ahead and log in. Switch to the details view. And you'll see similar album shows up there. Is it still disabled? Oh, yes. Good catch. You'll see now there's a loading animation, and basically I got back a set of albums from Amazon, filtered it down to my list of albums in my database, and I'm showing that there. And as I go navigate around, what I'm doing is fetching additional albums asynchronously behind the scenes. So let me actually show you the similar albums component in just a bit of details because it shows some additional concepts. So in my script library, I have a musicmix.js, and here's my similar albums data source component. It again follows a similar pattern to the component that I showed. It has an albums property, which is the set of data that the list view is going to bind to. This time it has an ASIN property, which is the Amazon way of identifying any product. I'm going to bind the data source basically takes a parameter, which is which ASIN should I go fetch similar items for, and that's my property. So every time the ASIN is set, I'm going to go ahead and make this call to my bridge, get similar albums, and I'm passing in the item ID, which is the ASIN. So if you remember, my bridge defined an item ID parameter that was coming in from the client, and this is the value for that particular parameter. Go ahead and do the same thing. Call this on data available when the results come back to the client. And there, I'm going to go ahead and set the albums property to the result and raise this change notification. So far so good. It's the same as what I was doing before. But now you can see I've taken advantage of the fact that this is now a component and added additional logic to it. For example, I'm building up a cache here. Every time I go and fetch results for a particular album, I'm going to go ahead and cache the results so that I don't have to keep going back to the server every time I go back and forward, let's say, in my UI. So when the ASIN is set, if my cache already has that information, I'm just going to go ahead and use it and return out of there without making this network call. And sort of to fill the cache on the other end, when my result comes back to the client, I'm going to put that into cache using the user context, which is the ASIN itself. Like here's the user context being passed into the call. So what you can see is now I've actually implemented this caching behind the scenes without actually having the UI layer know anything about it. The designer can go about defining the UI and use this component, and transparently behind the scenes, this component is now implementing caching. So what's happening is when I go, for example, back, you'll see there was no delay. You didn't see the loading sort of animation. And this was because the data was already on the client. So simply by virtue of the designer went ahead and designed all of the UI nicely, right? All of this UI doesn't contain any behavior, and then all of my behavior is defined down here, further down, as this reusable component that I can now drop on any page I want, and behind the scenes is implementing caching, and I can implement more smarts over time. So that kind of explains the general sort of how I've implemented a basic mashup scenario in Atlas. And I'll go ahead and implement the rest of the scenarios here in very similar manner. I'll add the artist search results. I'll go ahead and show events for that artist. Go to eventful.com. This is something I added just late. Here's the template for events. It's a simple item view. It's a single item. And here's the same thing going on I have a related links component, does the same kind of thing. The similar albums and the events. And with this, let's actually run this page. And so now you'll see what's happening is I'm loading different pieces of information asynchronously. There's no events for here, but I can go forward, and you'll see I show now different data. And for some reason, this is not working. Well, if this worked, the events portion of this demo is not working, but if this worked, you'd actually see Celine Dion's concert at Caesar's Palace for today, if this actually worked. So what I've done so far is shown how to implement various mashup scenarios in this simple application. So with this, I'm going to switch back and talk about another aspect of the programmable web, which is not about consuming services, but actually about offering services and offering data to other mashup applications so that they can actually make use of your data, make use of your services, and enrich their own applications. And I'll speak to that in the context of writing gadgets. I like to think of gadgets as an Uber service. It's not just about data, but a gadget is also a component. So there's UI that goes along with your data. There's logic that goes along with your data, as well as potentially personalization. So it gives you the ability to actually put a face on your data. And it's hosted today by Windows Live, as well as the sidebar, as you probably have seen so far. But the plan is also to enable other sites to host gadgets. Gadgets themselves are mini mashups in the sense they consume services, often from the server where they came from, but potentially from other servers as well. So why would you build gadgets? First, it's a mechanism, to create additional stickiness and propagation for your brand. Now you can take your brand that's on your website, offer a portion of your website, and surface it on live.com. So it creates this new sort of channel to sort of propagate your branding. Allows you to reach end users with services. So far, it's all been about applications talking to each other, but now it actually lets end users interact directly with your service. And obviously, once you have your gadget on live.com, you can also link back to your site, so it creates additional linking opportunities. So let's look at how ASP.NET allows you to author gadgets. So what I have in my particular application here is, as I mentioned, this application aggregates album selection and album rating across its users and creates a top-rated albums list. And I can go ahead and play this music. Here's like a music player I have in my application. It probably would be packaged in a more reasonable form in the page in line. But essentially, I have a player in my own application, and I can, this is a real player. Probably downloading the music. As you can see, it's a real player. I can, move through my top-rated albums list. So what I want to do, though, is it's unlikely that the user wants to have several windows up for just their player. They might actually want this to surface in live.com, which is a page they have up much more often, let's say. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is expose this UI, and by doing so, expose the top-rated albums service to live.com. So let's go to the home page. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a link to add to live.com, a very convenient link to add this UI to live.com. And go to my player. So here's my player. It's a standard ASP.NET Atlas page. It has some UI. Here's the div that contains the media player. It has all of the UI to control the media player, like the next and previous button, the play button, as well as the UI to show what's the current clip that's playing. And what I have is a custom component called media player that behind the scenes creates a media player object and allows the UI to sort of control that media player object. It is itself a data-bound control, just like list view, for example. So it has a property called XML data, which I'm binding to XML playlist. And XML playlist goes and talks to this service, playlist.asmx, get top albums. And so the service returns the list of albums. The media player binds to that list, selects the album to play, and plays it in the media player. And then the rest of the UI is just data binding to the current clip that's playing to show information about what's going on in the player. So I have this page. Now I want to expose this to live.com. With ASP.NET, we've made it very simple to do so. What I can go ahead and do is wrap my relevant portions of this page as a gadget. So I can say, all this UI and the script logic is part of the gadget, and I can wrap it with an Atlas:gadget control, a server control, run that server. It has a content template, which defines the actual UI. And then also add in some style references that contain the look and feel for my particular UI. So with this, let me actually go ahead and show that. So here's the button that I just added. It's a very convenient way to add to live.com. Obviously, a user can also manually add to live.com. So here I'm on live.com, and that's my media player that just got added. So I can go ahead and choose to add it, go ahead and install it. Live.com gives me a preview, and you can see here's my player page, just the portion of the page that I care about showing up in live.com. Go ahead and add it to my page, and you can see it's actually showing you the same data. Also still plays, right? So all of the UI and the functionality of that page, the relevant portions are now on live.com in this user's sort of page. So let's look at the service behind the scenes, what's actually happening. So as I mentioned, this media player is bound to an XML playlist that's itself bound to this ASMX. So what happens when I actually navigate to that directly? Here's the data that's being offered up by my site. Think of it as a REST service, essentially. You come up to this playlist.asmx. The operation you want to perform is get top albums, and it returns with an XML definition of a playlist, where a playlist contains a bunch of items. Each item defines its album cover URL, the URL to play, a link to the album to Amazon, for example, and the title of the track that's being played. So very simple playlist definition. Let's look at how I implemented that. So it's basically an ASMX, playlist.asmx, and very simply, I just created a method called getTopAlbums, again marked it as a web method. So I'm doing the same things that I would do to expose a service to my own application. Now I can actually expose it publicly as well. What I'm doing is running a query on my database to get that aggregated view of the set of top albums, create a set of playlist items, where each playlist item contains a sequence of properties, add that to the playlist, and return the playlist. This playlist is basically an object in my code. Basically has an items property, and you can see the items property has, each playlist item has a set of properties where I can annotate that with XML element attributes that define the XML structure for the outgoing sort of serialized format of this object. So I can say the album rating property surfaces as the album rating with lowercase a as an element in the XML serialized form, and that's what creates this sort of structure. So how does Atlas actually enable you to create a REST service with this web service-based model? So essentially what I've done here is go ahead and add this additional attribute, web operation, and I've said that the get operation is actually enabled. So someone using a get HTTP verb can now actually get this data. And I've said the response format is XML. So rather than sending down JSON, I'm actually sending down XML markup. And what I've also done is it's marked it as safe for cross-domain. So by default, all services are not exposed to other hosts. You can only talk to those services from your own application, from your own client-side application. But this is an interesting service that I want to expose out there. And so what I've gone ahead and done is marked it as safe for cross-domain. So this basically says, take the existing web service model you have and very simply transform it into a REST service. And so now this gadget here is making that call via the XML data source that I have on my page to that service, fetching the playlist, surfacing that as a list of clips that the media player can now go ahead and play. So that's basically what's happening here. And by using the same Atlas framework that I would use in my own application, I've now created a gadget to expose a part of my application to live.com. So that was one particular scenario of exposing services to the web from your own application. Here's another example, live clipboard, which you might have seen. It was actually discussed just an hour ago or here in this room, a full session on it. But so far, all the mashup scenarios that we've been seeing are all about applications figuring out when and whom to sort of integrate, which services to call, when to call. They've been about applications taking on the role of creating those mashup scenarios. How about letting end users create their own mashups? How about letting users take data from one application and pass it on to another application, whatever that application might be? The application developers might never have sort of planned for that particular scenario. So basically, Live Clipboard is about creating a clipboard model that applies to web applications. You can copy structured data, not just text, a full structure. And in my particular case, I'm going to copy a playlist, which is a structured sort of collection of items, to the clipboard to be able to paste it onto another website or potentially even your desktop. So you can have web-to-web as well as web-to-PC or web-to-desktop kind of clipboard scenarios. It works across browsers. It works across platform. It's using standard sort of DHTML and JavaScript techniques. And as I said, it's not just about text, which users can sort of select text and copy-paste. You see a lot of that, a lot of users doing that today. This is about applications providing the hooks to say, here's some interesting data you can copy. Here's the meaningful structural representation of that so you don't lose that information, and then paste it into a target that can actually understand that format. So it's all about users being empowered to do so. It's about letting users initiate the copy-paste of data from one application to another. So let's look at a demo for that, how Atlas makes it really easy to actually incorporate that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is on my music album details page, what I'm going to allow someone to do is when they're browsing a particular album, to copy the track list off of that album and then paste it somewhere else where it can be played, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment this button. I'm going to go ahead and create a button that allows the user to copy-paste data. And all I'm going to go ahead and do is create this Atlas component called clipboard button, which wraps all of the logic of live clipboard in terms of how you copy data to it, how you serialize data that's in the live clipboard format, how do you deserialize the live clipboard format back into structured data. This is done by the clipboard button. And the way the clipboard button works is it's bound to an object that actually contains the data that's interesting. That's the clipboard handler, which is pointing to this album object. This album object is a non-visual component that contains a set of properties, the title, the ASIN, the artist, and it also fetches the track list from the server. So it has a listing of all the tracks, the track information, which it's going to use to build up a playlist. So basically, this clipboard button is now associated to this album, and I have a bunch of CSS classes that allow me to customize its look and feel. So let me show that. Go ahead and go into my music library. And let's say I'm browsing, U2, and I want to copy this track list. Here's this button that shows up. This is the button that I uncommented, the div with an ID clip button. I can go ahead and click it. That shows up in activated mode. I can do Control-C, or I could go Edit, Copy, or right-click, Copy. So it's basically A, user-initiated, and B, works with all the standard sort of copy metaphors that already exist in the browser. Now, what's on the clipboard? What's on the clipboard is basically the live clipboard format. And it's this XML fragment. You can see live clipboard, data, format, and you describe the format. It's a mixed playlist format. The content type is text XML, and you see playlist. And it's actually the same format as what was being returned from my REST service. It has the same sort of information, the album cover, the title of the album, the title of the track, URL to the clip. All of that information is on the clipboard now. Let's actually paste this in a different application. So what I have here is a very sort of, it's a contrived sort of application. Think of this application as it takes XML, syntax colorizes it, and shows you that HTML. So I can go ahead and click this to activate, same thing. And instead of copying this time, I'm going to go ahead and paste. And you'll see what happened here was the data got pasted into this application. This application received a notification that data got pasted. It deserialized the clipboard format and figured out the XML that was inside that data format. That's this XML here. And then what it did was actually make a web service call back to my server to a service that performs syntax highlighting. And so this particular component here looks at the clipboard for any text/XML kind of live clipboard format. So let's look at how this was doing it. So I have an XML view component, which is a control that's going to talk to my service and perform syntax highlighting. And then I have my clipboard button. And this time the clipboard handler is the XML view itself. So let's look at the XML view component. So here's XML view. It's a control, which is just like a script component. It has a property called XML source, which it's going to, whenever it's set, it's going to go ahead and call the highlight service on the server, passing in the XML source. And then the server returns with some HTML that contains highlighted source, which it uses as inner HTML for the element it's associated with. And here's the interesting piece of functionality. So far, this was just a plain control. But now what I've gone ahead and done is implemented sort of the iClipboard handler semantics so that a clipboard button can now talk to an XML view control. In particular, it says, does this clipboard handler support copying? Yes, it does. It doesn't support pasting. So in paste, what I'm going to go ahead and do is take this clip data that's coming back from the clipboard button, enumerating through its formats, going through each of the formats and finding the first one whose content type is text/XML. If it is, then go ahead and use the data items, data associated with that, and set that as the XML source for this control. So what I've basically done is written a generic sort of XML view control that looks at pasted data, finds the first text/XML format, and goes ahead and uses that. Now let's actually look at a more sort of meaningful use for this particular format, which is to actually play the playlist. So to do that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is go to live.com again and add a second gadget which contains functionality for this for handling copy-paste. So I'm going to this time type in manually instead of having that button. Localhost music mix player EX, which is the one that contains my clipboard functionality added on. And you can see it shows up here now. Go ahead and install this. And you'll see this is the player. Go ahead and add that. I have 2 players now on this page. But this has the clipboard button here. And you can see that if I'm playing this album, I can still go ahead and paste on, and you'll see it picked up the new playlist, picked up the information, and switched into that track, basically. So let's look at just a little bit behind the scenes in this specific use of the clipboard, how this was done. So first, let's look at the album component, which is the one that's actually generating the clipboard data in the first place. So what I have is, here's the album component, and it's bound to various properties like the album ID, the artist, and so on. And as you'd expect, it implements the iClipboard handler interface. So this time around it says this can copy. It doesn't support pasting. In copy, this is where it's building up an XML fragment, a playlist with a set of items. And then what it goes ahead and does is it creates a data item with that XML as its data. And then it creates a data format of type MIX playlist, and the content type is text XML. As you can recall, this is what keyed off the XML viewer application. Add that to my data list of data formats, and the live clipboard format supports multiple formats, so you can actually offer your data in one or more formats, and then the target application can pick the format that it understands or that it sort of handles the best. Go ahead and create this clip data and return this out. On the other end, in terms of what's happening in the player, so here's the media player again, and this media player also implements iClipboard handler, and this time around in its paste method, it again gets this clipboard data, it enumerates through the formats, checks if the format is MIX playlist and its content type is text/XML, gets the data, and it creates an XML DOM around that. Now that it's got an XML DOM, it can go ahead and perform XPath queries, so select all items off the playlist and use that as the data property. So if you recall, media player is basically a data-bound control that can bind to a set of nodes or clip items, set that as the XML data, and the regular data binding logic sort of kicks in. When data changes, it picks the new clip URL and starts playing that in the media player. So as you can see, what I've done is created a custom data format playlist, shared that between two different applications in different browsers, and as well as different pieces of my own application in different browsers, all by virtue of this common data format. Just a little note on what's happening behind the scenes. Basically, this is a div, and it contains a text box. And I'm using the text box's built-in copy-paste functionality. I'm not using any APIs to programmatically interact with the clipboard, which is not allowed by default in the sort of internet zone because it's a security issue. But this is all about user-initiated copy-paste. So when this button is clicked, the text box's text is set to that XML format, the live clipboard XML format that's a result of serializing the clipboard data. And when I copy or paste, that's the data that's being copied or pasted onto the clipboard, the text of the text box. The text box is basically completely transparent, so you actually don't see the text box. That's what's happening behind the scenes. And the clipboard button Atlas object hides all of that, so you don't have to worry about how it's implemented. And what you can imagine is the Atlas team will sort of incorporate this functionality as a key part of Atlas. Right now, it's a concept that was first announced, I believe, last Tuesday by Ray Ozzie at a conference. So with that, I've come to the end of my demos, and I have some contents. Given this is Wednesday, all the related contents has already occurred. So you might want to check out on the post-show DVD these talks that have related material. We do have the labs at the Sandbox still going on till the afternoon, as well as the mixed chat where the entire Atlas team will be there to hear from you this afternoon as well. Some resources. If you're thinking about, I want to go start writing a mashup, how do I get started? A good place to visit is programmableweb.com. It has a listing of various APIs that are available on the web. I believe the number is around 300 or so. And a listing of mashups that use those APIs. And you can kind of see a cross-section of which mashup uses which APIs. And I believe there's more than 500 mashups at this point. ASP.NET Atlas, atlas.asp.net is your sort of starting point to get the Atlas bits, to look at the documentation, to participate in the forums, ask your questions, get answers, all of those things. We also have some blogs, myself and a couple other folks on the team, where we kind of post Atlas-related content. Finally, the call to action. So all of this is new concepts and ideas that are still evolving, still transforming. The final answers are not known. So both in terms of technology as well as business model. New services also coming online, new data, new interesting scenarios are being enabled. So experiment and participate and have fun at it. And while you're doing so, go ahead and download Atlas. Go ahead and we just announced the Go Live build just a couple days ago. Atlas enables you to develop mashups and gadgets, but also just client applications in general, rich client applications that sort of provide an enhanced user experience to all users. Stop by and talk to the team later today. After the conference, do send us feedback. We're always anxious to hear what you have, what you're trying, how we can help you further. And there's also a contest that was announced on Monday called the Mash It Up with Atlas contest. The idea is, use Atlas to write a mashup. There's, I believe, an Xbox and some mobile devices as prizes. So that's pretty exciting. Evals, do fill them out. Again, I think there's a prize for that too. So it's worth your while. And that's pretty much it. So let's actually take questions. I have about 15 minutes. Any questions? There are mics. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for your blog. I read it regularly. There's some great content on there. I was just curious if you'd be providing the sample today on your blog.
Thanks on the note about the blog. I will be posting the slides and the demos on my blog later today or tomorrow. So you can go ahead and download them and run them locally with, on your machine. Sure. The one with the URLs? Okay.
The bridge services files are new. Why would I use a bridge service instead of a regular web service?
So good question. The question is, why would I write a bridge as opposed to a web service? The bridge is basically a declarative mechanism to specify things that you would commonly do while writing the server-side proxy, namely caching, transforming incoming data, combining it with server-side configuration, making the call to the service, transforming data, transforming the response before sending it to the client. You do all these things, and the bridge allows you to specify a lot of that declaratively. It will be eventually toolable as well, so you can expect a design experience. That said, you can also plug in your own custom code. There are events that happen sort of like a life cycle. You can participate in the transformation of the response. You can participate in the transformation of the request, and so on.
Hi. Is there anything in the Atlas gadget area for authenticating users? So, for example, if you're on live.com, you want to provide a player like you've got, but authenticating the user, is there anything in there?
The question is, does Atlas provide anything on authenticating users?
To help with that.
So you can definitely use the authentication and profile store that comes with ASP.NET and Atlas from within your gadgets. But another interesting scenario really when you're writing gadgets is how you might integrate with the live.com preference store itself. So live.com has the notion of a user. You can sign in to live.com, and you can have your preferences persisted there. So what we do in our gadget APIs is expose live.com's get set preferences API to gadget developers. So when you use that, your data gets persisted as part of your gadget with live.com.
Okay, great.
Hey, I'm curious as to how you see, Atlas seems like you're consuming and passing and manipulating data a lot in JavaScript on the browser, and you're rendering HTML content that way. where do you see the balance of calling some sort of AJAX service that returns rendered HTML, or using asynchronous callbacks to return HTML that's rendered on the server versus rendering that client side on the browser?
So the question is around different ends of the spectrum, where on one end of the spectrum you have client-side logic building up HTML on the fly. On the other end of the spectrum, you have calls made to the server where the server renders some HTML and sends that to the client. It really depends on what kind of scenarios you're trying to enable. For example, if you want to actually perform things like sorting and paging on the client, you really need to send data in its raw form to the client and actually generate UI on the fly over there. If, on the other hand, all you're trying to do is update portions of your page, then you could render the HTML on the server, send pre-rendered HTML down. Somewhere in between, let's say you wanted to do something like I was doing, where I was making these calls to the server and also caching the data for further reuse at later points. There, it actually helps to have data in its raw form. So it depends on the scenarios you're kind of trying to implement. And they're also not mutually exclusive. In your same application, you might actually find some places where having the power of raw data helps, and some places where having rendered HTML is just fine. Case in point is Outlook Web Access. They actually do both things. Based on different scenario requirements, based on different perf requirements, they do a combination of both. Question there?
Writing these JavaScript behaviors and stuff requires a pretty intimate knowledge of JavaScript and the DOM and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes that's more of an art than a science. Are you guys planning on offering any prescriptive guidance or anything on best practices for building this stuff in JavaScript?
The question is around best practices around script and what we'll be doing there. We'll definitely, we'll definitely be providing some of that material as part of our documentation, as and when we build up the list of guidelines as well. We're still also learning. We're also going to be providing tools, and a lot of our guidance might show how you best use the tools we offer in terms of script authoring, debugging, and how everything fits together.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question. The playlist format that you put there, is that sort of just a illustration for purpose of example, or is that something that you're actually thinking of proposing as a simple format for playlists?
Very good question. The playlist format in the sample that I used is by no means what I would propose as an official playlist format. It was meant to illustrate the demo and get something simple up and running and kind of show the points of XML on the clipboard. That said, there's definitely a sort of a great thing that could happen by having key data objects, having a schema that multiple applications can share, and obviously a lot more goes into a playlist than what I have.
Hi, could you comment on the relationship between the new WebPart framework that's part of ASP.NET 2.0 and the gadgets that are on live? It seems like there's a lot of overlap between the two. Is there a plan to unify these?
There's definitely a plan to look at the overlap and figure out what are the synergy points between the two different technologies. For example, you might imagine, and this speaks to gadgets being hosted in hosts other than Windows Live and Sidebar, which is you might actually have a SharePoint portal site and you want to actually incorporate a gadget in your site. And that should be that's definitely a realistic scenario. So we'll be looking at scenarios like that and others over time to figure out where's the sort of convergence point, where's the overlap, what are the different interesting scenarios for people to kind of merge these two things together. Go ahead.
I have a question about your clipboard example. I mean, one of the problems we have today is with users being able to move files from their desktop seamlessly to their web applications. I mean, we have FTP, which is beyond the means of most users. We have WebDAV, which hasn't really been exploited very well. Will a scenario like this clipboard allow users to cut or copy and paste into their websites binary data?
So I didn't actually go into this. The talk before me actually showed how you can copy data from a web application to the desktop and vice versa by having a little helper application running on your desktop that monitors what you're doing with the clipboard, both in the browser and outside the browser, and transforming from from the live clipboard format to the Windows clipboard format and vice versa. So you could imagine that there are some scenarios that might enable things along the lines of what you were just describing. Any other questions? We still have 9 minutes or 10 minutes. Say that again. My email address is nikhilko@microsoft.com, or better yet, you can actually go to my website, and there's a contact form that you can sort of fill out, and it sends me email. All right, thank you.